David Coleman Headley's sentencing was supposed to bring us a step closer to the quest for justice in the horrific 26/11 terror attack case on Mumbai. It was supposed to at least heal some wounds of the victims of the attacks 4 years ago. But it turned out to be a story of disappointment and deceit, of betrayal by the United States of India. Headlines today, here and right now, exposes how Washington has betrayed the cause of justice in the 26/11 case by siding with a mass murderer and not with those whose blood he shed. While victims of the 26/11 case wait for closure, Dawood Gilani, alias United States government, cut a deal with David Headley. And now our editor, Strategic Affairs, Gaurav Sawant, is going to take you through the surface of what we're going to dig through and get you over the next 1 hour. Betrayal number 1 by the United States.
Betrayal number 1, David Coleman Headley, alias Dawood Gilani. He was launched by Pakistan Army and ISI, sent to the United States. From there, he came to India. So there was an elaborate plan. Somewhere down the line in this plan, between 2005 and 2008, the American government got a wind of this. They realized that David Coleman Headley was actually running drugs. He started spying for the US government, for the DEA. He was launched into India by the ISI in Pakistan. That information was hidden from Indian authorities. US authorities could have shared intelligence of Headley's frequent Pakistan visits. Every time he came to India, he went to Dubai, and from Dubai, he went to Pakistan to debrief his ISI masters. That information was hidden from Indian authorities, even though the US had access to this information. Had the US shared this information with India, Headley would have been denied. He could have been denied a visa for his frequent visits to India. That's point 1. Or point 2, he could have been kept under surveillance. Sadly, none of this was done. David Coleman Headley repeatedly came to India. He traveled to Mumbai, he traveled to Delhi, he traveled to several other parts of the country where he carried out a series of reconnaissance missions. Some of them led to the deadly 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks. That's not all. US hid information on Headley's Pakistan visits. He would come to India, he would go back to the United States, then he would go to Pakistan and brief officers of Pakistan's ISI and members of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. The US had access to all this information, even though the US talked a lot about the next step in strategic partnership, on sharing intelligence with India, on being allies in this war on terror. This crucial aspect was sadly kept hidden.
All right, that's just the surface of what we're going to bring to you. 4 points. Betrayal number 1. Remember, there are 5 to go. I want to bring in our executive editor, Rahul Shivshankar. We've also got Dr. Manoj Joshi of our sister concern, Mail today with us, a strategic affairs analyst and writer in his own right. Rahul, I'd like to come to you first. Not sharing details of his Pakistan visits, not sharing details of him being a double agent with Pakistan. What was the United States doing here?
Well, there has been a long period in which the United States used David Coleman Headley almost as a double agent to infiltrate into what it perceived were elements that were actually arrayed against the United States. He was first used as a DEA informant. Now, the DEA, in fact, has agents both in India as well as in Pakistan attached to the mission. So this man was used as human intelligence to infiltrate into drug rings, etc., and supply information to the United States DEA. Now, in the course of doing that, David Coleman Headley also turned rogue. He established relationships with the Lashkar-e-Taiba and perhaps others. All of this, of course, alleged and documented by the NIA. We have the NIA report with us. It goes into how he used his trips to Pakistan to establish himself as an agent for the Lashkar-e-Taiba. So somewhere along the line, he became a double agent. The United States was very nervous that if it had shared Headley's past, his dubious past with India, their use of him as a double agent would have been exposed, and perhaps it would have been inconvenient to the Pakistani government. Remember, the United States is allied with the Pakistani government, at least all through this particular period of time in fighting the war on terror shifts. So it became very inconvenient for the United States to share this information with India, because it would expose the United States as a country that was also digging in the backyard in the subcontinent.
Dr. Joshi, what's your reading of this? You know, at one level, nobody expects, any overt altruism as far as terror cooperation is concerned. But considering that the United States and India share several common goals as far as Pakistan is concerned, as far as the Lashkar-e-Taiba is concerned, as far as the 2611 terror case itself was concerned, what is your reading of the manner in which the United States, refused to share all this information with India?
Well, I think, Rahul has already brought out the point that, you see, the DEA claims that Headley stopped being its agent in 2002.
Yes.
But there are some reasons to believe that he was, at least till 2005, he was still, he had some relationship with the DEA. Now, did he have any relationship beyond that? Now, this is the murky part, because you see, when our NIA went to interrogate him, the interrogation was done under extremely controlled conditions.
Yes.
And so it wasn't as though we got free and fair access to Mr. Headley. So there's clearly something that the United States doesn't want to tell.
Yes.
And it's becoming very difficult, to say exactly what that could be. The thing is that if this man was an agent of the DEA, perhaps the DEA got some information but then failed to communicate it to the FBI. So there is a possibility that there was a blunder that took place out there. A more sinister thing, possibility is that he was allowed to continue his activities because there was a perception that these activities did not affect the United States.
Precisely.
And they affected India. Now that could be a more sinister explanation.
It's these tantalizing details of what we don't know about what possible deal the United States actually entered into with David Coleman Headley, that could possibly hold all the answers and flesh out this real betrayal for us. Gaurav, this deal that we don't know very much about, but was clearly the case as far as, Washington and David Coleman Headley was concerned. It just so happens that whatever this relationship was, it was a foil to everything that India wanted from this case.
Oh, indeed. As Dr. Manoj Joshi was rightly pointing out, even when Chidambaram, as then Home Minister and a strong Home Minister at that, he put his foot down and he said India needs access to David Coleman Headley. The United States very reluctantly granted access to 2 officers of the NIA to interrogate him, but under extremely controlled environment. The questions were vetted, the answers were vetted, so much so at one point of time the fear was that perhaps it would only be video conferencing. Anyway, though direct access was granted, questions were limited to 2611 Mumbai terror attacks, and nowhere were the officers who were interrogating him were able to talk about his previous involvement and post 2611 involvement. And that is the bigger betrayal that the United States stands guilty of, because despite 2611, despite David Coleman Headley having access to more information, India was denied that information.
Well, India was denied that information. We're getting some breaking news coming in right now. Gaurav, Rahul and Dr. Joshi, the United States Embassy in Delhi have just sent us a statement. I just want to read out a couple of lines from that statement just to place it on the record because it's pertinent to what we're bringing out here. They say, the 35-year sentence without parole imposed on David Coleman Headley marks another step in US efforts to bring to justice those responsible for the 2611 Mumbai terrorist attacks. This sentence reflects both severe punishment for Headley's role in the heinous 2611 crimes and a decision by the US Department of Justice not to seek the death penalty. This decision was taken because of Headley's willingness to cooperate with law enforcement authorities, American, Indian and others, to help bring the perpetrators to justice and prevent other terrorist attacks. And the final line says, Headley provided information that was of substantial value in our efforts to combat international terrorism and to save lives. That's what this statement actually says. It goes on to make some very crucial points, which I'm going to read out in just a couple of minutes. But I want to go across back to Rahul. Rahul, the statement from the US Embassy completely glosses over the sentiments that India feels right now. Certainly the External Affairs Ministry and the Home Ministry feel right now. But it's that relationship that was a foil to India that should be a focus now.
Yes, that plea bargain that we're breaking right now, and the details of perhaps why the US government went into the plea bargain are being addressed in this communique from the US Embassy. This is a post facto, in a sense, Shiv, post facto reaction from the United States trying to explain to the Indian public that is very outraged, upset, aggrieved at what it perceives is United States double standards. So here, if you were to elaborate on some of those points, you can see that the United States is trying to say why they went into this particular deal and how much they actually got out of this particular deal, which is of benefit to both India as well as the United States, and perhaps in a larger effort in trying to neutralize terror in the subcontinent. But the fact is, Shiv, that a deal was entered into by the United States with Headley to cover up some of their actions in the subcontinent, which would have been unsavory to say the least to both the United States and Pakistan. So a lot of the truth has been glossed over, Shiv, and that's really what's at the bottom of it.
Dr. Joshi, what do you make of the United States Embassy statement? They're saying, this was something that had to happen because of the value of the information that was provided by David Coleman Headley to not just to US investigators, but to Indian investigators as well. What does that tell you about the relationship?
Let's be fair on this. This is not a secret. In 2010, when the plea agreement was arrived at, wherein which Headley pleaded guilty, and there was a plea agreement, and the US prosecutor, I think, laid it out. He said that the maximum sentence for this is death. Or life imprisonment. But this will be we will take into consideration this issue. And even though he said that the judge would not be bound by the plea agreement, meaning that is very clearly laid out there. So the fact that there was a plea bargain is something which we know, that such a thing was going to happen, and that there would be this would be the consequence. Now, the issue that we face right now is that the Indian authorities are saying that, look, we think we can get more out of this person if we extradite him.
They're still saying that.
Or if you give us access to him. My point is that, once he has been sentenced already to 35 years imprisonment, the incentive for him to cooperate has gone. Meaning he had the incentive till he was not sentenced, because he still had the death sentence hanging over his head. But now that incentive is gone, so he's not going to. He has no interest in cooperating. He's got his 30 to 35 years. He's gotten away with without a death sentence. So I think what has happened is that the United States has carefully choreographed this. But in all fairness, we should say that that this was something we knew would be happening. And if we had to raise it, we should have raised it earlier.
We're bringing to you never before information and analysis on the 6 deceits that may have finally resulted in David Coleman Headley escaping the death penalty. He's got 35 years from a US court. A statement by the US Embassy here in Delhi has sought to defend against the sentiment in India right now that India hasn't been cooperated with on terror as far as David Coleman Headley is concerned. Gaurav Sawant, our editor of Strategic Affairs, was at the Chicago court last year when Tahavur Hussain Rana's testimony was being taken. Remember, he was sentenced last week to 14 years in prison. Gaurav, the devil is in the details as far as what else India could have actually had access to if they'd been allowed to interrogate and get even more access to David Coleman Headley, isn't it?
Oh, indeed, Shiv. And India repeatedly requested the United States for access to David Coleman Headley, not just because of 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, but other places where he had carried out reconnaissance missions. And crucial here is to mention the Pune German bakery. A blast took place there after 26/11 on the 13th of February in 2009. Now, David Coleman Headley had carried out a reconnaissance mission even at the German bakery at the Osho Ashram in Pune. Now, had India, and I've been speaking to my sources in the Ministry of Home Affairs, and they say, had they got detailed access, not such a sanitized access to David Coleman Headley, they could have grilled him further about where all he'd carried out reconnaissance missions, who were the people he'd met, and perhaps this Pune sleeper cell could have been neutralized. In Delhi, the National Defence College, he'd also carried out a reconnaissance mission there. Elaborate security measures have been put in place, but sleeper cells, the most crucial sleeper cells, the police could not get much information about, Shiv.
Gaurav, I also want to ask you about the third betrayal that we need to flesh out and get into. And we're talking about the double standards as far as extradition is concerned. Why are these double standards happening as far as David Coleman Headley?
Well, one, because he was a double agent. The United States doesn't want India to have full access to the information about his spying for the Americans and his being extremely close to Pakistan's ISI, because America is protecting its national interests. America is also playing playing ball with Pakistan, because America needs Pakistan in Afghanistan. And look at some of these faces that we've put out. When America wanted Mullah Baradar, who'd been arrested by Pakistan's ISI in Karachi, America got access to Mullah Baradar, even though Pakistan initially denied access. But America, pushed its way through. Of course, India doesn't have that kind of clout with the United States.
Yes.
But India should have pushed harder, and that's not the only case. Whether it's Abu Zubaydah or Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Abu Faraz al-Liwi, all along, it's the United States. When they want access to terrorists, they get it, even if it means flying those terrorists to the United States of America. When it comes to India, because our government doesn't push hard enough, we get the short end of the stick.
Rahul, we're calling these double standards, but the question that I'm curious about, did India do enough to get David Coleman Headley? Is there something more that India could have possibly done?
Well, there are reams and reams that have been written on this.
Yeah.
And at one level, the government has been accused of diplomatic capitulation to the United States. Remember the background of what was actually taking place when this case actually came to fruition or came to the attention of the agencies. You had in the backdrop the aftermath of the bonhomie that had peaked on the US nuclear deal in 2005 and so on. So the relationship, the trajectory of the relationship was on an upswing. And Barack Obama, there are several instances of Barack Obama actually guiding the process, including the investigations into David Coleman Headley and Tehevur Rana in a direction away from the glare really of those that were trying to extricate more information for New Delhi. But most significantly, there are documented evidences of, in fact, Barack Obama pressuring the Indian establishment to go a bit soft, to look the other way, to make claims which could be accommodated rather than those that would have pushed the envelope in a manner that would have benefited New Delhi.
Dr. Joshi, how much of a failure is it that India wasn't able to get David Coleman Headley extradited, considering the kind of cooperation India and the United States are supposedly to have as far as terrorism is concerned?
Well, I think in the last segment you have answered that question, in the sense if Headley was a US agent, if he played a certain role for the US, if he was important enough that the US could enter into a plea bargain with him, I mean, someone who is a terrorist, who is involved in the death of American nationals.
Yes.
Now, that's leave aside the Indians who were killed, but there were 6 American nationals who were killed. So the fact that if the US could actually have a plea bargain with him, which obviously means that there were certain, there are certain things which we do not know, which the US has received from Mr. Headley. And that is at the heart of the matter.
Rahul?
Yeah, there's one small point that I wanted to actually elaborate on. The fact of the matter is that the situation, the geopolitical situation in the subcontinent was also changed by the time Barack Obama assumed the presidency in the United States. The leverage that was perhaps extricated at some level or the other by Pakistan in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks had waned considerably. The other theater that had become more important was Afghanistan.
Yes.
And India's role there. So India was developing its own strategic depth in Afghanistan, if one can use that phrase guardedly. And therefore, it was gaining it was gaining their strategic depth because the United States was giving it a play in Afghanistan, and India had to balance its equations. Therefore, it couldn't really push the envelope beyond a certain point with Washington. Shiv, and that's one of the reasons why we had to do this sort of tightrope walk, where we got access to Headley, though it was a tutored access to him.
Was that access that we got to Headley, that brief access that Indian authorities got to Headley, the maximum that India could have ever hoped for? That's the tantalizing question. The United States Embassy in the capital has come out with a statement on the sentencing of David Coleman Headley. It's an elaborate statement where they have sought to explain why the terrorist responsible for the 26/11 attacks has not been handed down the death sentence. Let me just read out for you a couple of lines from this elaborate statement that's coming out from the US Embassy. It has said the decision was taken because of Headley's willingness to cooperate with law enforcement authorities, American, Indian and others, to help bring the perpetrators to justice and prevent terrorist attacks. Headley provided information that was of substantial value in our efforts to combat international terrorism and to save lives. The statement goes on to list 6 points, a 6-point detailed look at what kind of help they feel David Coleman Headley actually provided to authorities and investigators in the United States, as a result of which a deal was entered into with the 26/11 Lashkar-e-Taiba operative. Rahul, I'd like to come to you for a quick reaction on this statement from the US Embassy. It looks like it's almost defensive, taking into account the sentiments encompassing what the External Affairs Minister has said, expressing disappointment as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is a post-facto attempt at damage control, Shiv. Make no doubt about that. The relevance of the statement is to be only found in the 6 points that I elaborate. The rest is fluff, if one were to really cut to the chase. It goes on to say Headley testified against a co-conspirator, Tehvoor Rana, and therefore we got the conviction for Tehvoor Rana. It goes on to say that Headley provided extensive details about accused terrorist leader Ilyas Kashmiri and his network. Was that actually shared with Indian investigators? How has it actually helped the Indian investigators and their cases against the Lashkar-e-Toiba, especially those that have blood on their hands of the 26/11 victims? No one knows. Thirdly, it goes on to say Headley answered questions from Indian law enforcement. It's a very bland statement. India wanted this man. It did not want a shepherded, chaperoned process where the lawyer of this individual, Headley, was sitting in the room along with an FDI agent to ensure that no uncomfortable questions in the US eyes were asked of David Coleman Headley. It also goes on to say Headley assisted US investigators in bringing criminal charges against 5 other terrorists, but those are relevant to the United States case.
Yes.
Not to the Indian case. Headley provided US law enforcement authorities with extensive details about the structure, personnel, methods, abilities and plans of terrorist organizations, the Lashkar-e-Toiba. It hasn't meant anything much to our Shiv, simply because Hafiz Saeed sits in Pakistan, spews venom, hatches plots and instigates sleeper agents in India to conduct attacks. So none of these explain why the United States did not give one of the principal accused in the 26/11 attacks over to India.
I want to bring in our Home Ministry correspondent Kamaljeet Sandhu for a very quick reaction. Kamal, the United States Embassy has come out with a statement seeking to explain perhaps why, David Coleman Headley hasn't been given the death sentence, and they didn't ask for it because of his deal that they entered into. Give us a factual position, Kamal, very briefly, of what the Indian government's options are right now, if any.
Well, definitely the Indian government does know that Headley is, as far as the extradition is concerned, seems to be out of hand, at least for now, because of the plea agreement. But as far as Indian government is concerned, they say that agreement is only between the US government and Headley himself. It doesn't involve India, so India will continue to press for extradition for Headley. They say they want to demand the death penalty for all those perpetrators of 26/11, in which 165 5 people were killed, and Headley is responsible not only for recce of Mumbai conspiracy,
Right.
but also of several other locations in India. So definitely, as far as getting Headley is concerned, perhaps even the Indian government knows, but this is also a lot about posturing. They're clearly unhappy with this plea agreement, but they want to still press for extradition charges. And if that is not
Right, Kamal.
possible, the last possibility that they're really looking for is to have a video conferencing where he can really depose in the Indian court and also give us proof against Hafiz
Well,
Saeed.
the sad part is with each passing minute, those options actually become less and less probable because sentencing has already happened. Let's just remind you, the viewer, what the official reactions from the government have been. Here's External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid.
This is a much larger landscape, and our concern and our efforts have been explained to the media and to the public at large from time to time. Unfortunately, not everything that we do we can tell you immediately, and for obvious reasons, for strategic reasons. But I can simply say that the fact that an American court has recognized the role of an accused in perpetrating this crime in India is at least a good beginning. We would have liked a severer sentence, and as I said, we would have liked the accused to be tried in India. But at least a beginning has been made. We will continue our efforts to ensure that all such people are extradited and brought to India for trial.
कि जो प्ली बार्गेन उन्होंने एंटर किया है, ये एक्सट्रेडिशन नहीं होगा, ये उन लोगों के बीच में है। हम लोगों का रिक्वेस्ट एक्सट्रेडिशन का रहेगा, हम लोगों का एक्सट्रेडिशन का रिक्वेस्ट पेंडिंग है और वो हम लोग प्रेस करेंगे।
Betrayal number 4. We've gotten you 3 betrayals. There are 3 to go. Betrayal number 4 is the possibility and the scary notion that the US actually hid details from India about David Coleman Headley's Pakistani handler. Gaurav Samant's going to take you through some more details. Gaurav, they completely masked all details about his handler in Pakistan.
And not one handler, several handlers in Pakistan. While David Coleman Headley named officers of Pakistan's ISI, names, ranks, appointments, both serving and some retired, who were working along with Lashkar-e-Taiba, who were working along with Harkatul Jihad-e-Islami. David Coleman Headley gave the Americans details of who he met, who Tahawwur Rana was in touch with, who Hafiz Mohammed Saeed was meeting, who Sajid Mir was meeting, who Abu Al-Kafa was meeting, and there is a whole list of names that he's given out, from a Major Samir Ali to a Brigadier of Pakistan's ISI. He's given all those details. Reports suggest that the US, because of this deal with Pakistan, did not identify Lashkar's member A. Now, this Lashkar's member A was not named in that Chicago courthouse, even when the Tahawwur Hussain Rana trial was going on in Justice, Judge Leiben Weber's court. But it remains a fact, had that information been shared with India, India could have effectively taken steps to counter Pakistan. That sadly did not happen, because David Coleman Headley gave elaborate details of where he was trained, where others were being trained. You know, the Daurai Khas, the Daurai Aam, the Daurai Shufa, various kinds of trainings that were going on in Pakistan. He gave elaborate details of what Hafiz Mohammed Saeed was doing, what Zarar Shah was doing, what Zakir Rahman Lakwi was doing. All these details were shared. Half those details sadly haven't been put out by the American intelligence agencies, perhaps because they're protecting their assets in the ISI, compromising Indian interests.
Dr. Joshi, I want to bring you in at this point. You know, there's a United States deal with Pakistan, there's a deal with David Coleman Headley. You know, who knows who else they've got a deal with. It appears that the only people who've lost are the Indian investigators in this.
Well, you know, those are elements of geopolitics. And when geopolitics comes into play, I think Rahul brought that out. You see, in the sense, if you look at that period when Obama took over, his first interest was in the surge in Afghanistan.
Yes.
And for the surge in Afghanistan, he needed Pakistan. So if parallel to that, certain things are happening with regard to a terrorist operation that had taken place in November 2008, the US will, sort of ignore that and focus on the task on hand. And the task on hand was to keep Pakistan on their side in that period when this surge was taking place.
Yeah.
So I think that is the simple answer, in the sense that when it comes to national interest, their national interest will prevail over Indian national interest. This, I suspect, is
it only accentuates the point or the reality, Rahul, that India wasn't a priority in any of this.
Yeah, it's all about enlightened self-interest for the United States, and that shouldn't come as a surprise. Remember, the Obama administration's thrust, as Manoj Joshi is saying, was on securing Afghanistan after that surge. There's been a lot of criticism. It became a huge, big issue in the US elections. Obama promised that he would exit Afghanistan. They need Pakistan to stabilize. In fact, Afghanistan deals can be even now cut with the Taliban. There is so much talk of the Karzai dispensation in Afghanistan, fearing that Taliban might actually be given space on the table by the United States in the next administration, in the next setup, as soon as Obama exits in 2014. All of that is upon us. And United States is going to try and facilitate its exit by introducing more stability in only one manner. And that is to get Pakistan involved in Afghanistan. And if we can do that, then India's bargaining power at the table reduces. In fact, expect India to suffer and lose out.
It's not just about evidence. It is also about material evidence. It isn't just about names. It just isn't just about places. It's about audio tapes, taped conversations of David Coleman Headley speaking to his Pakistani handlers, David Coleman Headley speaking to other operatives of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, things that could perhaps have been matched with the evidence that the Indian authorities already have to make an even stronger case against Pakistan. Gaurav, this is the fifth betrayal, the fact that material evidence has perhaps been withheld by the United States as well.
Indeed, Shiv. The Federal Bureau of Investigation carried out a detailed investigation. They went into the background of David Coleman Headley and Tahabur Hussain Rana. So much so, I mean, both Tahabur Hussain Rana and David Coleman Headley took all precautions. Often they wouldn't talk on phone. They wouldn't talk to each other even at their homes. They would go out for a drive. The Americans, they bugged the car, and they got a lot of conversation that was, spoken between these two, Tahabur Hussain Rana and David Coleman Headley, while they were driving from point A to point B. Such level of snooping they did. Sadly, they did not share that information with India. Some of it was shared in a courtroom, but that was public information that was out in the public domain. Now, even if you remember in this case, the US Embassy statement says Tahabur Hussain Rana was convicted. He was not convicted in the 26/11 Mumbai terror case. He was acquitted in that case, sadly. He was only convicted in the Denmark case of that Jylland Posten newspaper case. And that is where US double standards are out in the open for all to see. They pursued that case in the right earnest. In this case, in 26/11, they kept protecting their Pakistani assets.
I'm very glad you brought that point out, Gaurav, because that is one of the rebuttals, instant rebuttals we have right here to one of the points that's made in that US Embassy statement that's just come. But before I get questions from Rahul and Dr. Joshi, I want to quickly show our viewers what the US prosecutor said after the sentencing. Here's what he said.
I want the citizens of India to know is that we've expended years of our lives collectively and the lives of dozens, if not hundreds, of agents and other prosecutors investigating a crime that occurred on their soil in the hopes of bringing some justice to the people of India.
Dr. Joshi, the relationship between US agencies and the ISI, it's clearly a much older relationship than the one that we have with, United States agencies. How has that affected the manner in which evidence of this kind, audio cassettes, names of people, have been completely and wantonly withheld from Indian agencies? After all, the 26/11 attack happened in India.
Well, you have to understand one thing. In the intelligence game, you do not reveal your sources.
Yes.
You give finished products. If you are in sharing intelligence, you share finished product, but you do not reveal your sources, your methods. These are absolutely a no-no.
Yes.
And there is no way in which they would have handed any of that. What you're saying is the raw material.
Yes.
There is no way in which they would have given that to us. That kind of stuff that kind of intelligence cooperation only goes on between countries like the United States and the United Kingdom and Australia, the so-called
and we are nowhere near that.
UK, USA countries. There are actually no other set of countries which have that kind of cooperation. The UK, USA countries have a special kind of cooperation amongst them. They even post officers into each other's services. But there's no way, this intelligence sharing business really means you're sharing finished product.
Yes.
Meaning you have a finished assessed product which is provided to the other country. Under no circumstances would you actually give, because that would reveal the level of your access to the other person and also your methods. And these are things which intelligence agencies do not like to give away at all. And finally, the point that must be made is that, look, the United States has a far greater interest in penetrating the ISI and in maintaining a surveillance over the ISI, and perhaps they feel that if they go beyond the point in sharing the information, their operations there may be compromised.
Yes. Rahul, isn't this then a reality check of where India-US intelligence cooperation really is about? Because so much is said about it. Lofty things are said about, the complexity of the relationship. At the end of the day, if we can't get a terrorist nailed, what does it say about that?
Shiv, that's a very good and fundamental question that you've raised, because there's been a lot of cynicism. In any case, during the Cold War years, India has not really been well disposed towards American foreign policy and its objectives in South Asia.
Yeah.
For a while during the Bush presidency, perhaps the end of the Clinton era and the Bush presidency, there seemed to be a synergy, and it only happened because of the 9/11 attacks, let's not forget. That's when the Americans began to get aware of what India has been saying about the subcontinent and the forces of Islamic terrorism here over the last 2.5 decades. Till then, India wasn't taken seriously because, as we've said, right or wrong, American enlightened self-interest always took position number one. The fact is, now, the Indians will have to assess whether the Headley case is going to become a watershed case, and can it actually bring back that cynicism in Indo-US intelligence cooperation that existed at a country-to-country, nation-to-nation level all through the Cold War years. This case really requires soft handling, intelligent handling by the United States. The statement, unfortunately, that they've put out a pathetic excuse for the justification for not handing over Headley, for not going after him, is too soft. They need to really work extra hard to convince India that, well, they're serious about co-joining us on this war against terror. Perhaps now is the time really for a big ticket gesture. Maybe even getting Pakistan to hand over one of those 26/11 accused.
Well, India feels like it's owed something at this stage, and I can tell you that the sense is unanimous in the strategic affairs analysis community. Here's what several analysts had to say about the sentencing and the way India feels at this stage. Here's what they think.
If you look at the statement of the judge when he was delivering the sentence, he made it very clear that David Headley deserved the death sentence. But however, since that was not an option, because the US government had accepted a plea bargain, they had agreed that there would be no death sentence and there would be no extradition. But if you look at the statement, I think the sentiment of the judge is very clear, that this was the kind of crime for which he deserved the death sentence, and he made it very clear that the so-called remorse that Headley was showing was not satisfactory, and that he remains a terrorist.
35 years of life imprisonment given to Headley is against the treasure trove of intelligence information he has given on plea bargain to the American intelligence agencies. When you don't have a focus, Headley would not have given you much. You would have invited him here, entertained him like Kasab. You have not hanged Afzal Guru at all, who should have been hanged, just out of vote bank politics. So the crisis is with government of India. It is in paralysis. Its focus it is defocused, and the kind of statements it is giving, it looks that we are more pro-Pakistan than pro-India.
The 6 deadly deceits that have made for India losing its grip on David Coleman Headley. The 6th is, of course, the basis of this story. The fact that India hasn't managed to get any inroads as far as justice for the 26/11 victims is concerned, because David Coleman Headley will spend 35 years in jail and he will not face the death penalty. Gaurav's going to take us through that point as well. Betrayal number 6, Gaurav.
In that Chicago courthouse, the prosecution made that point. It's not just the 10 men who pulled the trigger, but even the others who were involved in plotting this terror are as guilty, even if they did not pull the trigger themselves. That be the case, why is it that the prosecutors themselves chose a lesser penalty for David Coleman Headley, one of the main plotters of this terror attack? For Rana, who did not have a direct role in terror, US prosecutors sought 50 years. Rana's only role was actually conveying the information. Since David Coleman Headley couldn't speak to his handlers directly in Pakistan, he would talk to Rana in the United States, and Rana then would speak to the ISI handler or Hafiz Saeed in Pakistan. So that is how the system worked. But for Rana, the prosecutors sought 50 years. For David Coleman Headley, they pleaded for leniency because he was sharing information, 35 years. Is this fair? Well, Judge Harry Leiden-Weber himself said that this man is a terrorist. I'm not sure he's reformed, but because the prosecutor has pleaded for leniency, I'm going with 35 years. I'm not convinced.
Well, that's the betrayal, the 6 betrayals that we're actually talking about here on Headlines today. The fact that the United States kept Headley's 26/11 plot under wraps, the fact that they entered into a deal, with Headley at the cost of the investigation in India to foil India, the double standards on extradition as far as David Coleman Headley was concerned, the fact that they shielded Headley's handlers, as a matter of fact, in Pakistan, they withheld all those tapes, the audio tapes that could have been so useful to the Indian investigation, as well as the term that was anything less than a death penalty as far as the Indian investigation was concerned. Rahul, I want to bring you in right now. Yeah. Is the Headley case going to actually affect future cooperation between India and the United States on intelligence cooperation?
Well, it's something that has been talked about in strategic and intelligence circles, but I doubt very much, given the equations and India's need right now to have the United States in the right corner, so to speak, because of what's going to evolve and shape up in Afghanistan, etc., and the near strategic neighborhood. I don't think this is going to become a huge diplomatic inconvenience. But let's quickly shift, for the purposes of our viewers, go back to Gaurav Sawant once and ask him to take us through all the 6 betrayals altogether.
Indeed, let's go through all the betrayals one after the other. Betrayal number 1, US did not share information with India on David Coleman Headley's Pakistan visits. Had they done that, we could have denied him a visa, we could have stopped him, or we could have trailed him when he came to India. Let's look at betrayal number 2. And betrayal number 2 is plea bargain with Headley. This was a part of a US plan, because of which India did not get access to David Coleman Headley and know about future terror plots. Let's now look at betrayal number 3. US got the terrorists they wanted, whether it was Mullah Baradar or Abu Zubaydah Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Abu Faraz Al-Libi, but India did not get access to David Coleman Headley. Why did the US practice these double standards in this war on terror which the two countries are fighting together? Betrayal number 4. FBI case makes no record of David Coleman Headley's interaction with ISI officers, both serving and retired, and also with Hafiz Mohammed Saeed, Zarar Shah, Zakir Rahman Lakwi, and a number of other Lashkar-e-Taiba commanders. Let member A is thought to be on trial, and is that Zakir Rahman Lakwi or Zarar Shah? Well, the US still keeping that a closely guarded secret. Why are terrorist identities being kept a secret? Betrayal number 5 is US withholding tapes of conversations between David Coleman Headley and his handlers in Pakistan, including perhaps Ilyas Kashmiri of 313 Brigade of the Harkatul Jihad-e-Islami. So this man was in touch directly with ISI, with Lashkar-e-Taiba, with a number of other terrorist organizations. The US knew that, hid that information from India. And betrayal number 6, seeking a lighter punishment for a man who may not have pulled the trigger himself and 166 people were killed, but is as guilty, if not more, than those 10 terrorists, then 10 Pakistani terrorists who came and attacked India on 26/11.
Well, that pretty much covers where India stands right now and what must occupy the Indian establishment for the foreseeable future as far as this crucial case is concerned. But there are several questions. Should India use the Headley case and link it to any future cooperation? And is what has happened in that Chicago court an indictment of the reliability of the United States when it comes to intelligence cooperation? We're entirely out of time on this special broadcast, but I can tell you we will continue to follow up this story and get you much more. Thanks very much, Rahul Shivshankar, Manoj Joshi, Gaurav Sawant, for joining us on this special broadcast.